Welcome back to Coffee Corner Motorsport, Four Beans the podcast. You, of course, listen to the Formula One news show, Espresso News. I'm your host, Terry, and whilst I was going to bring you a separate testing podcast, I decided that you listen to my voice far too often during the course of a week, so I'm going to put it all into one show, and this is a look back at testing and what we can expect from the teams before they head to the track in Australia next week, and what do we learn from testing, as well as, of course, the normal weekly Formula One news show from the paddock to the podcast via my shed. And this week, we've got Motorsports UK chairman Dave Richards hitting back at the FIA. We've got Netflix and Drive to Survive. We got how much Dad spent at the Las Vegas Grand Prix. And of course, we've got Ferrari taking Aston Martin to court. So if all of that takes your fancy, we might go just over a touch on the 30 minutes we normally do this week. So apologies for that one. But anyway, grab your coffee, sit down, strap in, and let's give it some full beans. Okay, let's look back at testing. Now, testing throws up very little in terms of actual performance on the track. We know this. We know there's a lot of sandbagging going on. We know there's a lot of hiding going on. And just what did we actually find out? We've got some clues to the overall shape of the grid and where we're expecting teams to kind of fall. We've got some questions. We've got some answers. And of course, we haven't really got a standout performance apart from McLaren. McLaren looks strong. I mean, we kick off with McLaren. They look strong. I mean, in terms of their setup, they were optimising setups. They were going for a more aggressive cooling on the car from day two with Lando's car. They looked like that car had much more to give. They looked like there was much more performance to come from it. Yes, a lot's changed. Zach Brown's been talk about all of the changes to the car, but also they look comfortable with their runs. We saw Oscar bail it out on the last corner on the last day when he looked to be setting the fastest time. So my take from this, McLaren looked like they were honing in on things which you do only when you're actually in a really comfortable position. They didn't look like they were dialing in too much on performance. It was more about testing lots and lots of the car to get optimal performance whilst actually looking good, which is an ominous sign for the rest of the grid, if I'm being totally honest. Mercedes had a good set of running. However, the big question mark over Mercedes is, of course, the cold weather. Bahrain was unusually cold. We actually, ironically, had warmer temperatures in Silverstone and Barcelona on one of the days that we had in Bahrain. And of course, we had rain in Bahrain. As well as a burst and some other things, but we won't go there. But in terms of Mercedes, yes, they looked better in terms of W16 and the ability to dial a W16 in. But what we don't know is that due to the cool weather. We know that, of course, Mercedes last year run absolutely extremely well in the cool weather. You know, let's think back to Las Vegas and the advantage that they had. Think back to Silverstone with Lewis winning and actually the changing temperatures at Silverstone last year and what that did to the car. So Mercedes have traditionally been quite good in the colder weather with the current regulations in play. So what we don't know is, have they solved this? Now, we know that Mercedes tended to overheat their rear tyres. They got a clever little thing in terms of their development going on with the floor, which directs the airflow better to the back wheels. That's a nod to my tech corner. If you've not already checked that one out, don't forget to head on over to FanAmp to check that tech corner out. And of course, a quick reminder, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, follow button here whilst you're on the channel for Coffee Corner Motorsport to be notified when all of the latest news drops from the world of Formula One and these podcasts and videos get released. I'd really appreciate it. But anyway, going back to Mercedes, we're not too sure whether or not this is a sign that they've cured it or they haven't. And to be honest, Toto was very elusive around this question when asked the same by the press of have they actually solved the hot weather problem in the Mercedes with the W16. So Australia is going to give us a real clue to whether or not Mercedes has made a step forward or they haven't. Ferrari, their general consensus is they were sandbagging, trying lots out. Obviously got that new front suspension on the car. And Lewis is trying to get used to the car more. Different steering wheel to what Charles got, much more like his Mercedes steering wheel in terms of what they've been able to adapt to help Lewis settle in. Charles looks probably more comfortable, but you'd expect that. Lewis hasn't driven anything bar Mercedes powertrains before, and he's getting used to driving a Ferrari full stop, getting used to the team, the setup, the controls, the run plans. All of these things take time. He's still adapting, and it probably shows a bit with the testing. Had a problem on the Friday, didn't do the sort of fast running. A lot of speculation whether or not that was true. We don't know, nor will we ever find out, but I think the general consensus is that they are sandbagging. Then we come on to Aston Martin, and nothing really special to report. Lance Stroll was obviously ill, but they tended to just kind of be there. Nothing stood out on the AMR25. Nothing caught your eye into development where you went, wow, that looks like a step forward. So I'm really unsure to where Aston Martin are at the moment. Adrian Newey obviously started this week with regards to his new role with Aston Martin. We'll come on to Enrico Cardal when we talk about Ferrari and the Espresso news later on in the show. But they seem like a team still in transition. I don't know if there's stuff to come from them. I don't know whether or not this is just a tread water until obviously Adrian can get a hold of that 2026 car. He said his focus is on 2026. He said that don't expect too much to change in 2025. I've said on a couple of podcasts, I think he would have a look to see if he can make some instant development. I imagine he's already had a look at the car. Whilst he may not have been officially able to work for Aston Martin, there's nothing to stop him sketching in his own time, nothing to stop him seeing the plans, nothing to stop him seeing what he saw in testing, which we all saw. So I wouldn't be overly surprised if Adrian's come in with an immediate impact to kind of do something. But yeah, for me, it's a case of waiting to see if they've got enough to, hit back in that 2023 podiums, hit back to challenge the top four as such. But at the moment, I'm not seeing it, if I'm honest. Williams stunned everyone. Carlos Sainz top of the timing charts. Is this Williams showing their pace? Is this too much from Williams? Is this it for Williams? Is this as good as it gets? Probably the best prepared they've been for a number of years. They've turned up with a car that isn't overweight. They've turned up with a car that isn't being put together with duct tape on the final day, or flying parts out in the hand luggage like we've heard over the recent years. So I'd say that Williams are well prepared, but James Vowles has been very open and honest about how he sees the team, sort of writing off 2025 still. So what does that mean? Does that mean that this is it? As in, this is a car they've gone all out. They're going to start strong, but just, filter off at the end, halfway point, end of the season, when there's no development coming forward because everything's lumped in 2026. That's the big question mark and concern over Williams. Got some new parts. They've obviously taken the latest on the rear suspension from Mercedes in terms of their customer car deal. The car itself is an evolution rather than a revolution. Alpine have got something similar. We'll come on to that one. But they seem to have reused a lot of the old parts, obviously to do with cost cut. The chassis is the same. They're reusing some parts where they can. A lot of teams are doing this. It's not unusual, especially with the regulations being so much the same. So I don't know whether or not Williams have kind of peaked and they've done this to show that we've got a car loss, we mean business, and it's a sponsorship stroke. This is what we're good at, or whether or not they're going to start off strong and then, like I say, they're going to start trailing off when that development doesn't come through, when all the other teams catch after the first few races or so. That's the big question mark with Williams for me. It looks good, it looks solid, but can they maintain it? Then we come on to VCARB. Now, VCARB are a team which kind of, you'd never know what you're going to get with them. They seem to struggle with getting those Red Bull parts working for the VCARB. So we know they take on what they come from Red Bull in terms of being a customer team. It's the same as what the other teams do with their customer teams. So it's not illegal. It's not anything wrong. And to be honest, I think VCARB are a prime example that we don't share information in Formula One because they can't get these Red Bull parts working as well as Red Bull can. And that's very obvious with their setup, with their car, where they're looking, what their expectation is. All of these things seem to be that once again, we go into a season not really knowing where the car's going to be. The lineup with Yuki and Hadja probably is not their strongest that they've had. I think they've had stronger lineups over the previous few years. And you go back to obviously Gasly and Yuki is probably one of the strongest pairings they've had over recent times. I don't think this one's anything up to that. I think Hadja may struggle. I think the car's going to struggle. I'm not seeing enough to make me go wow on it. I'm not seeing enough to make me go they've cured the problems they had last year. So for me, they're a team which are going to be fighting to be best of the rest in that midfield pack. That's for sure, looking at it so far. Then we come on to Red Bull and the RB21. Now, the RB21 is a bit of an enigma. It looks remarkably like the RB20. Christian Sanders, they've changed a lot on it. Pierre Wache's told us that the testing didn't go as smooth as they wanted. Max Verstappen at times looked a bit sort of bewildered, a bit sort of not really knowing, but this is testing. This is what it's for. It's designed to dial your car in. It's designed to try new things so that you get the feedback on that to see if that development route is the right way forward, and the parts you've got are a step in the right direction. That's why we have testing. The cars don't come out hit testing at full pace on the optimum setup. That's not the point of testing at all. So have Red Bull shown their cards? Are they playing things down? Are they doing the age-old sandbagging? Have they made a difference with the RB? Is it easier to set up? Last year, they fell into that Mercedes trap where it looked very difficult to set up at races. It seemed like they couldn't really get the ride height they wanted because their development route looked like it had gone down the wrong route. We saw Mercedes doing this in the past. We've seen Aston Martin do it in the past in the current regulations. it's a sign of the cost cap era. So with the cost cap era, you can't actually sort of hone in too much on development. If you go down the wrong route, it takes you a while to develop back because you haven't got the money to do it like you used to have in the olden days as such, making me sound old, that does now. So have Red Bull done that, and have they now solved it, or are they still looking for answers, obviously, with the lack of knowledge that no longer having Adrian gives them? And let's be honest here, missing Adrian is a big factor in your team. It doesn't matter how good your people are. It doesn't matter what sort of level they're currently performing at. You can't take someone like Adrian out of the equation and then not miss him. I think it was Autosport put a statistic up that said 6 drivers who have won the championship with Adrian Newey cars have never won one since he left that team. That is a shocking statistic. That is shocking, and probably a true testament to how good he is. I mean, you don't pay someone, with his add-ons, his share options, etc., $30 million or £30 million, whatever they're working in. You don't pay him more than some of the drivers on the grid without him being good at what he does. And that's the reality of this. Now, there will be fans saying that, he's been hands off recently and, it's time for Red Bull to come out to their own and it's time for them to take a step forward. And yes, they've got a great team. Adrian helped assemble an amazing team. He didn't do it himself, don't get me wrong. I'm not for 1 minute saying he is. But to then naively say you're not going to miss Adrian Newey is a kind of, I've said before in the past, it's disrespectful and it's just not true. You would miss Adrian Newey. Anybody would miss Adrian Newey. That is a fact. And I think Red Bull are in that stage now where they're regrouping. They're looking to the future. They're trying to see where they can take this car in the last year of regulations before they switch to 2026. Of course, they've got massive pressure. The 6, Max Verstappen expects a championship-winning car. They know that Aston Martin and Mercedes are circling. If they can't provide Max with a car that can at least challenge for the championship, we know Max doesn't need the best car as such. What he does need is he needs a car that can allow him to compete. If he hasn't got that, Max will look at his options. He's already talked about how he's staying with Red Bull to the end of 2026. So that's 2 years off what his contract is, and that gives you an impression to what he's thinking. He's thinking, I want to see what the new regulations bring. I want to see what the new engine does. I want to see who's got the best out there, and then I'm going to make a decision. There's clearly break clauses in Max's contract that allows him and Red Bull to part ways as well. We've heard in the past stuff about Helmut Marko, stuff about performance, stuff about where they finish in the Constructors' Championship. All those things play a factor. So Red Bull, I imagine, are looking very nervously over their shoulder at the RB21, and can they actually get what they need from it to ensure that Max has got a car that allows him to at least compete and at least win championships still? Because if they haven't, then there's a couple of teams sniffing for him, isn't there? In terms of Haas, we didn't see spectacular from Oliver Behrman or Esteban Ocon. It seemed solid. And for me, I would just have to take away that Haas are probably the best prepared they've ever been going into a season. We know financially they're better off. They looked more prepared. They look better. They look like they've at their game across the board. Their social media engagement looks great at the moment, by the way. If you haven't gone on board with that, check it out, because Haas are doing some great posts. So I think Haas have definitely turned the corner with the injection of cash that they had starting off on MoneyGram. Obviously now with the Toyota Gazoo Racing partnership as well. Gene Haas has said it's not his money going in. So Haas definitely look like they're a team which are on the... They've not taken as many Ferrari parts unusually this year in terms of the front suspension. So let's see how that plays for them. They decided it wasn't worth the risk in the last year of the regulations, both financially and performance-wise. So I'm really intrigued to see how they get on. But like I said, they've got 2 drivers who went about their business quietly, efficiently, and got through the programme as they wanted to do with a good number of laps for Haas. So I think they'd be happy with it. I think they'd be happy with how the team's set up. I think Io Komatsu is very realistic. He's got that engineering background, so the test will cover what they need to cover. Will it be enough to propel him up? Sort of 6th place has got to be their aim this year. I think that they might struggle with the re-emergence of Williams, whether or not VCARB's got it right, Aston Martin, of course. So there's a lot in that mix for that midfield battle, which makes it even more exciting to see exactly where Haas are going to be on this. Where are they going to fall this season? Was last season a one-off because the other teams didn't quite get it right? Or actually, are we seeing Haas coming out from the shadows and emerging as a midfield contender first and foremost as their new position on the Formula 1 grid? Really interesting to see how they do once the season gets up and running. Then we've got the last 2 teams, in no means in this order, although the last team probably is from that point of view. And then, of course, we've got Alpine. Now, Alpine are very much a bit like I said about Williams, Alpine are doing an evolution, not a revolution. Last year, they turned up in Bahrain. Car overweight, chassis bad, lots of problems. What they've done this year is that car that came at the second half of the season that progressively got better and better, they've carried it into the 2025 season. So they front-loaded their investment. They made sure that last year's car can actually stand them in good stead for this season. So in terms of the chassis, the parts on it, the front wing, a lot of stuff on the Alpine looks remarkably similar to last year. Now, does that mean that they've got it wrong? No, of course it doesn't. Evolution could just be as successful as Revolution. If they had performance there that they couldn't extract because of the cost cap, if they had performance they couldn't extract because they just didn't have time to get those parts to the track, then yes, of course, it can be just as good Evolution can be, rather than revolutionarily changing something and maybe not getting it right. So while some teams have looked to Revolution, McLaren primarily very high on what they've done. Mercedes has got some tricks up their sleeve as well. But ultimately, don't rule out Alpine's evolution and that gentle step change that they're making, very similar to Haas, as being a bad thing for them, all the Formula 1 grid. Far from it, in fact. And then, of course, we've got State, who just look in trouble once again. Nothing from State really fills you with on-track optimum performance, does it? We're not seeing anything. Fastest in the speed traps, that's about it to get excited for. They're not talking a big game. They look like they've made steps forward. Clever little things on their wheel guns with the lights on it. And, when they're doing the pit stops, that's great. After last season, I'm glad we're talking positively about Sauber pit stops. But ultimately, with regards to the team, they look like they're in transition. Audi look like they don't want Sauber to do well. They look like they don't want to take the glory until they come on board, until those 4 rings are on the car and they've been branded and changed over. So it feels like, for Gabriel Bortoletti and Nico Hulkenberg, it's going to be a really, really long season towards the back end of the Formula 1 grid from what we're seeing so far. Hope I'm wrong on that one, but I've not seen anything at all that leads me to believe that this isn't going to be the case at all. So with all that in mind, that is the run to testing. So what have we learned before we head to Australia? Now, the advantage before we head to Australia, teams actually had a couple of weeks to take the data back to the factory, analyse it, get an optimum setup for Australia. That's not something that normally happens, with Bahrain being the following week and the final day looking towards the Bahrain setup. So it will be good to see what the teams come up with, having had the time to crunch that data. I'm still expecting the top 4 to be the same. I'm still expecting those, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull to be challenging for the win. I don't see any of the others kind of making the step up. I think that midfield is going to be really mixed. I think that's where the real battle is going to be, if I'm honest. I feel that's where the real contenders are going to get their arms out. I think Williams will be looking to focus on a good start. They had a poor start last year with problems they had. Obviously, when they went to Australia last time around, only one car, etc., etc. The car was giving them issues. So I think that Williams will be looking for a really good start to the season on that point of view. And then with regards to everyone else, I just think that we need to just see the first couple of races. We go straight into a sprint race in China. I think that's going to mix everything up. We won't have a lot of data from that one. Completely different track conditions to what we're going to get in Adelaide. So again, that could completely mix everything up for a sprint weekend for itself. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see what's going to happen. I'm still expecting McLaren to come out the guns being the strongest team on the grid, if I'm honest. So with all that in mind, that is your testing roundup and your quick look forward to the Australian Grand Prix. I will obviously be posting my normal race preview on my social media channels and obviously here on YouTube as well. So keep your eye out for that one. Like I said at the top of the show, if you're not already, hit like, subscribe, follow. Make sure that you are in the best position for 2025 to receive the most up-to-date news as it happens in the world of Formula 1. Now, grab a coffee and get onto that news that we're talking so much about. Right, Formula 1 Espresso news. Now, it's been a fairly quiet week in the world of Formula 1 news. There's not been a huge amount happening. That was to be expected. Testing gave us a load of sound bites, and then obviously everyone off they went and disappeared. Right, but in terms of the news, Motorsport UK chairman Dave Richards and his letter to the FIA. Now, for those who may remember, Dave Richards got refused admission to the latest World Motorsport Council meeting. He refused to sign an NDA, and because of that, they said that basically he could not join the World Motorsport Council meeting. Now, his argument to this has been quite vocal. He's threatening legal action against FIA. He says that he's always abided by the rules in place by the FIA, and this NDA basically takes it too far, too much further than what it should do. And he's always abided by the NDA that the FIA have in place. No reason to change it, no reason to sign a new one, and that's the basis of this legal action threat. But he has written a very stark letter to UK motorsport members, and this is what he says. So he says, let me read it out for you. Dear licence holders, club officials and volunteers, as your chair, I've always believed, along with the board and employees of Motorsport UK, that we are answerable to you in respect of all of our actions. After all, our task is to serve the best interests of motorsport in the country and represent you, our members. In my role as a member of the World Motorsport Council, I'm also accountable to the full FIA membership worldwide, and this letter has equal relevance to them. For some time now, I've had concerns about the erosion of accountability and good governance within the FIA. As you may have seen in the press, an issue has recently emerged that has compelled me to take a stand and needs an explanation. First of all, let me turn the clock back to a little more over 3 years ago, when we, alongside the Royal Automobile Club, supported Mohammed Ben Sulayem in his bid to become the next president of the FIA. Many of you were possibly surprised that we didn't support the British candidate Graham Stoker, but the board met with both candidate teams and was convinced by the well-thought-out plans that Mohammed's campaign team presented, which were very much aligned with our own views in the way that the FIA should transform itself. The key messages in the presentation were a hands-off president who would be non-executive and delegate the day-to-day running of the FIA to a professional executive team, the appointment of an empowered and capable chief executive officer to run the FIA to professional standards, full transparency of actions and the highest standards of sporting governance. He then goes on to say, I'm afraid that over the last 3 years there has been a distinct failure to meet those promises. In fact, the situation has progressively worsened, with media reports confirming that numerous senior members of the FIA and volunteer officials have either been fired or have been replaced under an opaque cloud. Furthermore, the scope of the audit and ethics committees has been severely limited and now lacks autonomy from the authority of the president, whilst our UK representative who challenged certain matters was summarily removed along with the chair of the audit. Various techniques have also been deployed with the effect of limiting the proper function of the World Motorsport Council, primarily the use of e-voting, which removes the opportunity for much needed discussion and debate on key subjects. This is becoming increasingly worrying, and the final straw for me 3 weeks ago was being assigned to sign a new confidentiality agreement that I regarded as a gagging order. At the time of my appointment to the World Motorsport Council in 2021, I signed a confidentiality agreement and in fact was already bound by Article 4 of the FIA Code of Ethics. I remain committed to my confidentiality obligations under this existing agreement and Article 4, which remains in effect. However, the new confidentiality agreement went far further than this, and at a week's notice, I was told that if I didn't sign it, I would be barred from the next World Motorsport Council's meeting. The key causes I objected to were everything was now considered confidential without any qualification, preventing me from necessarily sharing what I considered to be relevant information. The FIA, at its own discretion, could decide if anyone breached the terms of the new confidentiality agreement with no process or frames of reference, and there was an immediate fine of €50,000 for any breach and a threat of undisclosed damages. The construction of this new confidentiality agreement does not comply with the statutes of the FIA and contradicts the promise of transparent governance we have voted for. I therefore ask that we debate the matter at the World Motorsport Council, which was just days away, rather than having it forced upon us as a condition of attendance. My requests, along with those of a few other members who shared our views, were denied and we were barred from attending the meeting. This was in total breach of the FIA statutes that require all elected members to be given full access to meetings. I should point out that I kept the board of Motorsport UK fully informed throughout to ensure that I had their complete support. Our Motorsport UK lawyers, along with our French legal counsel, have challenged the FIA on their actions by setting out a clear set of questions that the FIA leadership needs to answer. It's very disappointing to report that we have still not received an answer to these or the fundamental question I raised. Where in the FIA statutes does it provide an elected member to be barred from a meeting? I remain open to signing an appropriately revised confidentiality agreement if that's what's thought necessary, but only when we've addressed the key question of what constitutes confidential information and, importantly, who decides on breaches and the implementation of penalties, and in what procedures I believe I have a fundamental duty to keep you, our members, fully informed, and the way the proposed new confidential agreement is structured would prevent me from doing so. So it just goes on a bit more about his threat of legal action and what he's looking to bring, and the fact that he's deeply upset that he's been barred from it. So it's one of those where I agree with him. If he's already bound by the clauses he said, which I don't know the FIA rules inside and outside, but I'm sure he does, and I'm sure that Motorsport UK's legal team do. So therefore, I'm absolutely with him on this. I think that transparency is key. I think the FIA hasn't got transparent at all. Those things are completely clear in what he's saying. So if he's saying that Mohammed Ben Sulayem hasn't led to those election promises, which, on paper certainly, looks that way to me, certainly looks like he's got a good case on that one, then I think he's fully entitled to call out Mohammed Ben Sulayem on those points as well. So I really want to know where this goes. The FIA steam a bit on the self-destruct button. We've had talk of Susie Wolfstanding. We took about on last week's podcast. We've then heard since from sources saying that she's not interested. Whether or not which of these is true, I don't know. It's one of these where we'll have to wait and see. I'm not too sure where this goes. I kind of feel that Formula One don't want to break away from the FIA. It's not something they want. It's not something they really want to sort of focus on. They want to do. They've got no real inkling to it. They've got no real sort of drive to take over from the FIA. The FIA do more than what they think about. And I think from that point of view, there's some questions to be answered, but I'm not sure whether or not they're going to get the answers they need. So yeah, that's really it for Motorsport UK chairman. Dave Richards is, of course, been considered in the past an outside candidate for the FIA presidency role, but from what I can gather, has no interest in standing, and for whatever reason. But like I said, let's see where this one goes. Keep your eyes peeled for this one. I think this one could run on and on and on, that's for sure. Netflix Drive to Survive. By the time this podcast launches, it normally comes out Thursday night, Friday morning. Netflix launches tomorrow, which is obviously the 7th of March. The normal sort of buzz being hit about it. Snippets are coming out, lots of trailers. The one thing I will say about Netflix, and I've always said this, I watch Drive to Survive. I love seeing behind the scenes of Formula 1. It's a drama. Stuff's edited. The storylines in there are not transparent in terms of this is what actually happened. I think if you retain that information, you're going to be fine. This year, we're going to see Kimi Antonelli get his Mercedes seat. We're going to see Toto and Lewis's relationship. We're going to hear from a bit about Ferrari. Apparently, we've got a Christian Horner scandal in there. We've got Carlos Sainz not signing for Williams in Barcelona. I was one of the people who reported on that was pretty much a certainty. It seems like that was the case, but obviously at last minute he pulled out due to Flavio Briatore being appointed by Alpine and Alpine putting in a last minute offer. That's what put the rails on that one, which I remember reporting on at the time from Barcelona because we were there. So yeah, I think it's the same old with Drive to Survive. Like I say, I'm ready to watch it. I like it. I like it behind the scenes. I take the storylines with a pinch of salt. Apparently there's some bits in there where George Russell has a panic attack after Singapore, which a lot of people have criticised. So I think you've just got to take it for what it is. It's entertainment. This is what Netflix and Drive to Survive do. They want a captive audience. It's not a documentary. It's a drama programme. And as long as you remember that when you're watching it, everything's good. But yeah, that is out on Friday. So if you want me Friday morning, I will grab my popcorn and my coffee and I'll be tuned in to DTS. Las Vegas Grand Prix. How much did Dad spend? Let's cover that one off, shall we? So Las Vegas Grand Prix reporting that there was a revenue of $934 million of off-track activity. Now, off-track activity means hotels, eating out, gambling, all the things you don't do at a race weekend. I'm pretty sure Dad didn't spend $934 million. I don't know. I'll have to ring him and check with him. They're saying that works out about $2,400 per person on non-race related activities. I can believe that, if I'm honest. Think back to what we spent there. If you think by the time you did Ubers, eating out, hotels, general touristy stuff, gambling, let's be honest, everyone has a gamble in Vegas. So, yeah, 2,400 is probably not wildly wide of the mark in terms of splitting it down per person. There will be some more, some less. I certainly didn't spend that, but I think Dad may well have. But I'm joking. I don't generally know what he spent, but when you break that into like sort of 6-7 days, it's not actually a huge amount. It obviously doesn't include race tickets and what you spent at the track, but I think the savvy people know not to buy too much stuff at the track and spend too much money at the track once you got a ticket. So good to see that it's still bringing in revenue. Obviously, a decrease on last year, but you'd expect that. Lots of sales going on with Las Vegas Grand Prix towards the end. Lots of price drops, lots of sort of creators being invited into there. So I imagine the same will happen this year. My advice on someone who's been to Las Vegas, don't buy your ticket early. Wait, because I feel that you'll get a good offer. We kind of got stung with ours a bit. If we waited to have that even longer, we would have got an even better deal on tickets. We got a good deal anyway, but you would have got an even better deal. So we paid, I think, 1,500 for ours, UK pounds, that is. We had 1 day hospitality for the first day of practice, and then we had 2 days in the grandstand. We got upgraded and moved to the main Heineken start-finish straight. So we got a good deal for that, to be honest. With that includes food, drink. In terms of soft drinks, it's alcohol you pay for on top of that. So it's not a overly bad deal when you think you haven't got to pay for food at the track, which when you go Silverstone and you see some of the prices they're charging for food there, actually it starts racking up if you're there for 3-4 days sometimes. So yeah, it's not a bad deal. They are cheaper, they are more expensive depending on what you're looking for. Obviously, if you want full-blown hospitality in Vegas, it's going to set you back a pretty penny, probably on Monaco sort of levels. But in terms of grandstand seats, there's some good deals to be had around, and a lot of places are showing watch parties, stuff like that. So it's a good thing to go to. Obviously, this year it's starting 2 hours earlier, which will be great. I struggled when I went to Las Vegas with starting at 10 p.m. in the evening. I was still in UK time. Still talking to Joe, make sure the kids are okay. He done me in, to be honest, from a just body clock and timing point of view. I think if you go to Vegas and you can get a lie-in, brilliant. If you go to Vegas, you like me, sat in Starbucks at 5 a.m, probably not the best. But yeah, I really enjoy Vegas. Vegas is not on our list for this year. We're actually looking at going potentially to the Dutch Grand Prix. We're obviously going to Silverstone, but we're looking at Dutch Grand Prix. The dates fit for us in the middle of the summer holidays. So that's where our aim is this year, with that opening up a surprise for next year, which will be great. Yeah, that's kind of where our Formula 1 Grand Prix experiences are going so far this year. Could all change, has done in the past. We did 3 races last year when we only planned 1 at the start of the year. If the deal's right and we can find a way to make it happen, then we will. But that's where we're looking at so far. But that brings us nicely on to the final part of the Formula 1 Espresso news. And that is Ferrari taking Aston Martin to court over Enrico Cardaro, who was, of course, due to join Aston Martin in March as their new technical director around the same time as Adrian. So we found out that a couple of weeks ago, basically, Ferrari went to court in, I think it was Modena, and won their case against Aston Martin starting him early. So the judges now ruled that he can't start until, I think it's about July the 18th, which is basically around the summer break. So with the factory shutdown in there, he's effectively not going to be working until after the summer break, which is what Aston Martin didn't want and what Ferrari definitely wanted. They're saying he's already started talking to Aston Martin, so therefore he's in breach of his contract. That's what they use as the basis of their case. We haven't seen details of what that communication looks like, but the judges obviously seen enough to make the ruling on it, and it looks like no one's appealing it. So it makes you think that whatever Ferrari presented was pretty concrete and pretty damning, to be honest. So yeah, that's basically where they are with it. Of course, they've got Adrian Newey. It will help Aston Martin from a cost cap point of view because they won't be paying for his wages whilst he's on gardening leave. That responsibility belongs to Ferrari still. So actually, we might see Adrian stepping in a bit helping. We might see Dan Fallows helping. He's still there. In terms of the design team, he's just obviously got moved away last year. So we might see him slide back across and potentially help out. I don't know. They've not really talked about it. Aston Martin. Ferrari released a statement. Aston Martin remain pretty coy on what's going on, but I don't think it's a major problem for them in terms of their setup. They're just going to have to move things to later on, and it might just affect the 2025 development more than 2026 development, if I'm honest on that one. And I think that is it for your Formula 1 Espresso news. I tried to keep it to around the sort of 30-minute mark again. I appreciate that people normally listen to this on their way into work. As a quick snippet of news. I don't want to make this a big, long podcast. It's never been my intention. It's what I wanted to do. But I did just want to touch on a couple of things before I leave you for this week. And one is this here. So this here, I've got a couple of things to news. So this here is Crofts' commentary notes from Silverstone in 2024. So Lewis Hamilton's win last year. We were, of course, there. Dad brought it over last week, which is amazing, by the way. It goes into all the details, all the things. So on there, it talks about, Alex Albon, 8th in the 2023 British Grand Prix, scored points in 3 of the last 4 Silverstone races. only one point scoring in 2024. So these are what Crofty uses for his notes. Even tells you about the corners. That corner's sixth gear, 121 miles an hour. I assume it's miles an hour or kilometers an hour, whichever one Crofty's working in. That one's a sixth gear, 125, 7, 158, 365. Do you know what I mean? So it's given me a huge respect for how much work goes into Crofty's commentary notes, if I'm honest. And two, Dad brought this completely off the bat, no inkling of this. Just rocked up with it on Sunday. I put a poster where Crofty commented on, which was amazing. And so shout out to Crofty, made my day. And then I got contacted by the team who make these, which are basically the sportscommentators.com. So they do all sorts of sports, not just Formula One. They do rugby, I believe. They also do football as well. And they take copies of these notes that the sports commentators do, and you get unframed, you get framed, you get signed versions, you get all these things. And you're probably wondering where on earth I'm going with this. Well, they reached out and told me that I can bring you an exclusive offer if you want anything from the sportscommentators.com. So if you do, I can get you 10% off your order. So if you head on over to www.sportscommentators.com, pick anything that you want. When you go to checkout, if you add in Coffee Corner into the promo code, it will take 10% off any order that you place with them for the next few weeks at least. So certainly there's no time limit on at the moment. So a huge shout out to them for obviously sending the code over. And hopefully some other people will go and order and get the same enjoyment I did, because genuinely, as a fan, these are amazing. They're absolutely off this world. So that's just a bit of sort of news I like to bring you. And I don't like bringing loads of promos to people because I don't want my page to be a selling page at all. Apologies if it does feel that way sometimes. What I try and do is I try and work with brands that I trust, and I try and work with brands to bring everybody who listens a decent deal. This isn't about monetizing the account. This isn't about gaining income. This is about trying to work with partners who I feel can bring you an offer as well as, help me out as well. Now, I like opportunities. I like going to places. I like meeting people. It's what I always love doing. And when a brand reaches out, if they've got something where I can bring a discount code or I can bring something to help people, I love doing that. So hopefully you don't see it as I'm just here flogging their stuff. I genuinely love the stuff that I tend to partner with anyway. I tend to, as a fan, it's something that excites me, and I just want to share that with you. And if I can save somebody 10% in the process, then Joe, happy days. That's 10% you can put towards a race ticket or put towards something else. So yeah, big shout out to sports commentators. And like I said, if you enter Coffee Corner into the code on their website, you'll get 10% off. Now, in terms of me, I've done a couple of podcasts recently in terms of guest podcasts. So I was with the Midfield Pod last week. So go check their podcast out with me on it. And I also did a show with Ewan as well from Pole Position Fantasy. So go check his out as well. I'll try and find the links and drop them into the description on these podcasts as well, so that you can go check out those interviews. We will, of course, be back next week on the Fancy Formula with Fanamp. So I'll be joining Adam, and we've got a new host in Zach. Rob's gone off to do other things on his own channel, and we've got somebody new in, and we're ready to go with our preview show and then also our deadline streams as well. So we're not too sure what the deadline streams are going to look like for the first part of the season, because obviously we normally do it an hour before the deadline locks in terms of Fancy Formula. However, with the time zones like they are, we're still openly debating what the first part of the calendar looks like before we switch to normal times and do it an hour before. So keep your eye on social media for that one. If you haven't already, like I said, subscribe, hit like, hit follow, hit me up on social media at Coffee Corner Motorsport on all of the channels you'll find me, or of course my website, which is www.coffeecornermotorsport.com. And that's it for this week. So a huge shout out before I go to my wife. It's our wedding anniversary tomorrow. So when this podcast comes out, I did the show on behind the scenes of Coffee Corner Motorsport a couple of weeks back, and the midfield guys talked about it a bit. And one person who doesn't get a shout out enough for making this happen and everything happen is Jo. So she's a constant. She is the biggest cheerleader. She is the most amazing support. She makes sure that I can still go off and do things. She's very keen to make sure that I spend time with Dad, we make memories, I get some downtime. And none of this would be possible without her support. So whether it be, making sure everything's right whilst I come and film podcasts, whether it be making sure that we've got plans in place for support when I go to a race, all of these things happen behind the scenes. And Jo, unselfishly, never says no, never stops me from doing things. It's the first to encourage me. It's the first to literally go, chase your dreams, and hunt everything down. So with our wedding anniversary come up, I feel that the podcast is the best place to give a shout out to the amazing Jo and send her some love, because Coffee Corner Motorsport would not exist without her. So yeah, massive one to. You'll never see her hardly in any videos. She doesn't like videos. She doesn't like cars. And I very much doubt we'll see Jo at a racetrack, unfortunately. But in terms of support, she is definitely pole position for that one. So huge shout out, Jo, and happy wedding anniversary. And I love you lots. In terms of everybody else, I will be back, of course, next week with the Espresso news on Coffee Corner Motorsport Four Beans podcast. So enjoy your week. And we can finally say next week is race week and Formula One is finally back. You've been listening to Formula One Espresso News. I'm your host, Terry, and I'll see you next week.